Okay, folks, welcome to our third video on basic math. This one we're going to be dealing with percentages. You should be very familiar with percentages. You use those every day, especially at school. You know, what did you get for a percentage on this project? What did you get for a percentage on your midterm exam, right? And that's just describing how much of that whole exam did you get correct. If I got 80%, that means if it was a 100 question exam, I got 80 questions right? If it was a 200 exam, I got 160 questions right. That's still 80% of the whole, right? We use this a lot in kitchens because we can then compare how much we spent on something like, say, our food cost from one month to the next, even though our revenue changes, right? We can look at our food revenue one month being $10,000 and the food revenue being $40,000 the next month, but if we still stayed in that 30% range, that means 30% of our revenue was spent on food, right? So it gives us a baseline that we can compare on an even field, right? So how do we convert numbers into a percentage? Well, the textbook will tell you to move the decimal point from the number 2 decimal places to the right and add a percentage sign. Well, what are we actually doing there? We're taking a decimal and multiplying times 100 to move that decimal place, right? So this first example I have here, it's asking us to convert 0.849 to a percentage. So we have 0.849, and what we're going to do is multiply times 100, which will in turn move our decimal place 2 places to the right. And that's going to give us 84.9%. Pretty straightforward, right? Turning a number into a decimal isn't difficult, but we have to remember that when we're doing mathematical calculations, we can't have it as a percentage. We have to have it as a regular number, so we might have to turn percentages back into whole numbers, right? So our first example here, we ended up with 84.9%. More often than not, we're going to be doing the opposite in our calculations. We're going to remove the percent sign and move the decimal place 2 points to the left. Well, what are we doing to do that operation? We're actually going to be dividing by 100, right? So I like to say we're either multiplying by 100 or dividing by 100 because sometimes you can lose place of where your decimals are. For example, this example of 4.6%. Well, we want to get to a decimal. So we need to divide by 100 to move the decimal place 2 places. So in this case, we have our decimal there. It's going to go 1, twice. Our decimal is going to be over here. So we got to put in a 0 and a 0. So we're going to have with 0.046 is our original number. Now, it's quite often people get confused and they miss out because it's just 4.6. They only end up moving it once. That's why I always say use your calculator, divide by 100, and then you're actually going to get the right number of decimal places. Very common mistake that people make is they start losing decimal places, and that can make a huge difference, especially when we're talking dollars and cents, right? So, like I said, you're going to make sure you add that extra 0 into the extra place. So our answer is 0.046. So what does this represent? Percentages are representing essentially the part of the whole, right? So the next slide here, I have a triangle, which helps us understand the math around how we figure out percentages. So we have this triangle that you're going to see pop up quite often in this class. So we've got the part, we've got the whole, and we've got our percentage is what we're going to get, right? So this graph here represents the red circle is the whole, and the little black wedge here is the part. And then what I've got left in the red here is the whole. So this would be that, and this would be that, right? So that triangle helps us figure out one part of the whole circle, or the whole pie, for example. So to use a formula, we cover up the variable you wish to find or solve for and follow the remaining instructions. So the percentage is always written in decimal form when we do this calculation. So that is no decimal sign, and the decimal point is moved 2 paces to the left. So we're in that decimal form, right? We're not in the percentage point. So the key words when you're looking at questions is, is equals a part and of is of the whole. And you'll see that how that sort of plays out in the examples coming up here. So this first example, 4 is what percent of 19? Okay, so we need to decide which is the part and which is the whole. So, because that's going to give us our percentage. Otherwise, you could look at it as that triangle that I had. Part, whole, gives us our percentage. And we had an example of 4 is what part of 19? So we need to decide, is the 4 a part or is it the whole? Well, it says 4 is what part or what percentage, right? What percentage? So 4 is going to be our part and whole is going to be our 19. So 4 divided by 19 is going to give us a decimal. So that decimal is going to give us, my slides, 0.2105. To get to a percentage, now we need to multiply times 100 to get our 21.05%. So what does that mean? Out of the whole circle that I drew before was 19, our part here was 4, which is 21.05% of our 19 is 100%, right? Our part of our whole of 19. Okay, so another example. If I can get my screen cleared here. Another example. Now we've got 22% of, what is 22% of 78? Well, again, we can use our triangle, part, whole, percentage. And we just need to decide, is 22%, well, it's, percent is right in our triangle. However, we can't use it as 22%. We need to convert that into a decimal. So that's going to be 0.22. And now we just have to decide, is the 78 the part or is it the whole? So we're asking, what is 22% of 78? So if we draw our little pie again, and we had our whole, 100% is 78, right? What's 22%? So this has got to be the part, right? So the 78 has to be the whole in this case. So 78 times 0.22 is going to give us our, what's our part, right? Of 17.16, or rounded to 17.2, depending how many decimal places we want to go with in this example. All right, next example. We've got 28 is 65% of what number? So again, we can use that same triangle. And we've got a percentage, so let's put that in there right there. As a decimal, we can't do any math with it as a percentage. Now we just have to decide, 28, is that the part or is it the whole, right? 28 is 65% of what number? So it's telling us that 28 is a part of something, right? So that means 28 is our part. So that means we're going to take 28, divide by 0.65, and we're going to end up with, punch it into my calculator, 43.08, or 43%, right? So not much to go on for percentages here. You're going to find them very useful as we go through. We use them a lot in our industry so that we can compare our production or our expenditures even though our revenues may change, right? All right, that concludes our videos on basic math. These should be relatively review to yourself. They shouldn't be brand new information that you're learning. It's just a quick review so that you understand some of the tools that you're going to need as we move forward in the course. Thank you.